Anyway, welcome everybody. I'm glad to see a mostly full house here. I'll start with a land acknowledgement. We respectfully, is that freaking you out, the sound? We can survive? Okay. Oh, thanks. Oh, I'll take that. We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federal lecture of the 2025-2026 season. This year is visiting artist Lauren Bond. After tonight's lecture, our series will continue on March 17th, when we welcome photographer Eduardo Cadava, also here in the CCP. So if you look around and you see the room that you're seated in, it's that same room, right? Okay. So I'd like to begin by offering my thanks to the School of Art Advisory Board, whose vision and effort made the Vase Speaker Series possible. While the board is temporarily on hold, their efforts were instrumental in making tonight possible. I'd also like to thank the members of the Vase Committee, ably led by Regents Professor Sama Al-Shabi. Where is she? Where is she? I see her. Okay. Do you want to stand up, Young? The committee works hard developing and implementing our VASE program every year, and it is a rigorous process, and we're all grateful for those efforts. On behalf of the College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture, we'd like to kindly thank Jones Studio for their sponsorship of the Grand Challenges Lecture Series. Their continued generosity supports the series in its aim to engage students, faculty, and the broader community with thought leaders across disciplines who are actively shaping the future of the built environment and society. Brian Farling, who will deliver the introduction, is a principal and co-owner of Jones Studio, where he has helped shape the firm's environmentally responsive design ethos since joining in 1908. I mean 1998. I'm kidding. Sorry. I don't know Brian, so I'm not sure if I'm allowed to pull a joke like that. But I'm excited for tonight's speaker. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Brian.
How's that? Is that better? Yeah. Okay. So artists need to create on the same scale that society has the capacity to destroy. If you research Lauren Bond and Metabolic Studio, you'll find a giant neon sign with these words. I see it as their mantra, their drumbeat. Scale is the key word from that mantra in relationship to tonight's lecture. Scale is a critical aspect in the concept behind the Grand Challenges lecture. I'm talking about what you can touch and smell versus what you can see and hear, two very different scales, versus, and perhaps more importantly, what you cannot see, hear, smell, or touch, which I know Lauren's going to speak to quite a bit tonight. For young artists and architects alike, the ability to switch scales excuse me, and comprehend or contemplate the implications is a skill that connects to a larger spectrum of thought and inspiration, and it is as to how to know better and exist more gently on this planet. This concept of scale jumping or shifting is why I believe having Lauren here tonight is such a treat for all of us. Lauren Bond is an American environmental artist and activist and a 2025 Guggenheim Fellow in Fine Arts. Her practice, Metabolic Studio, explores self-sustaining and self-diversifying systems of exchange that feed emergent properties that regenerate the life web. Part of a global art cohort addressing our current environmental crisis, Bond uses living systems and infrastructure to create durational, large-scale place-based projects and performance, photography and sound to activate these works and engage her audiences. Through her multidisciplinary approach, Bon has carved out a space between land art, conceptual art, and transmission art. Her questioning of the status quo and persistent alteration of civic infrastructure demonstrates the power of artists to provoke change and shape opinion through soft diplomacy. Some of her works that she may or may not share tonight are Not a Cornfield, 100 Mules Walking the Los Angeles Aqueduct, Moving Mountains, and Bending the River. Bending has been particularly inspirational to me, and because of my daughter, who wrote a paper at college for her modern and contemporary art class that highlighted this project, Bending the River, I became aware of Lauren's work and ultimately visited the studio and developed a friendship. I am honored tonight to introduce Lauren Bon.
Thank you so much, Brian. Hi, everybody. I've had such a wonderful 24 hours in Tucson and such a wonderful time meeting with 5 graduate students in art and seeing this beautiful campus. So I'm going to roll this back, starting here with this image from 100 Mules walking the LA Aqueduct. I'm sitting by the river, watching it pass, lifted from its natural borders and edges, moving now, though, through steel veins and under concrete. I'm sitting there with my eyes turned across the Great Basin. And as an artist working in the American West, I've learned this place refuses simple stories. Scale does something to you here. Distances stretch between mountains and deserts, between water and its absence, between cause and consequence. You begin to think less in lines and more in systems, less in objects and more in relationships. The West asks you to think like a network, like a body, like a cyborg. By cyborg, I mean a landscape where biology, infrastructure, and governance are no longer separable, where rivers, machines, policies, and bodies are entangled in daily life. And when I say my work begins with scale, I am always moving between scales. The scale of bacteria, fixing a photograph in playa mud, the scale of dying cottonwoods, the scale of a pipe beneath a channel, or medium scale, a dust mitigation grid, a dam, a water right permit, a floodplain being cut off, or large scale, the hyperobject of the whole Colorado River, the Rio Grande, the Columbia, plus the Sierra snowmelt, engineered into one watershed, feeding a network of cities across the Intermountain West. This is the cyborg body that we're all living within. Or the scale of time, a day, a decade, a century, the Cold War to now, plus deep time, where rivers still remember. Meaning doesn't emerge through linear explanation here in the West. It emerges when the patterns repeat across scales, when the small and the continental snap into the single frame. This prophetic map, the continent stripped bare, I removed all of the outmoded borders and offered a prophetic map based on a geological concept. No states, no countries, no property lines, all flow, all watershed. It's a reminder that the governing lines we live by often contradict the ground itself. This is where my lecture on the Intermountain West begins. With the Intermountain West as an organism, a body whose true boundaries are hydrological and geological, not political. And it is a big challenge because the systems that move water and power today operate at that underlying scale, whether we admit it or not. The ancient Greeks named such a river Meandros, a river whose sinuous curves were so distinctive that its very name became a verb, to meander. What if we let our rivers meander again? And what if we followed their lead? And then we overlay our current reality. This slide shows the dams and diversions that seize the major rivers of the Intermountain West. Each mark is a point where the flow is interrupted, dammed, diverted, stored, pumped, negotiated. This is a cartography of control. These are decision points where a river's agency is converted into allocation. In this system, the rivers are no longer only rivers, they are managed machines, and the West becomes a manufactured watershed. The Colorado River is not only a hydrological system, but a mid-century technological landscape. Water infrastructure and nuclear infrastructure are co-evolved here across the deserts. Dams, diversions, test sites, mines, uranium tailings, what reads as color and dot is also time, risk, and residue. This watershed carries flow, power, fallout, memory along the nearly 1,500 miles long Colorado River watershed, once reaching the sea, now managed, contained, and stressed. Big challenges are not isolated problems. They are layered systems we are still living inside. Let's turn to 1905. Let's go back in time to a diversion of the Colorado River which broke. And the river did what rivers do when control slips. It moved. For nearly 2 years, the Colorado poured into the Salton Sink, uncontainable, unstoppable, and it created what we now call the Salton Sea. It's one of the clearest examples in the American West of how a single infrastructure failure can redraw an entire region. Over time, the sea has been sustained largely by agricultural runoff, a kind of accidental reservoir made by the byproducts of irrigation, which you see there on the south side of the Salton Sea. And now the inflows are shrinking. The shoreline is pulling back. And what's revealed isn't just absence, it's exposure. The exposed lake bed, the playa, becomes dust, and the dust is water displaced, made airborne. So the Salton Sea is a cautionary tale, not only about engineering, but about scale, because all that playa dust will lift into the atmosphere and we will be breathing the toxic residue of industrial ag. So when you intervene at the scale of a continental river, the consequences also arrive at a continental scale, but they concentrate locally in lungs, in soil, in schools, in heat. And this is where I want to introduce an organ. The smallest sea with the largest heart is an accretion object. It's making visible two things. One, that the blue whale once lived in the Salton Sink when it was a continuous sea with the Pacific, and that the blue whale heart is the largest heart of any mammal that's ever lived. So I made this sculpture that is currently sitting in the Salton Sea. It grows from minerals, sunlight, and electrical charge. It's not carved, it's not cast, but it's accreted like stardust, layer by layer, out of the water and the sunlight itself. It grows from minerals, sunlight, and electrical charge, because in this watershed, nothing truly disappears. On it are lithium, trace metals, agricultural residues, salts, all the chemistry that moves through the system and moves through us too. In this process, those traces are not erased. They're gathered, layered, held. So the heart becomes a kind of instrument, a way of making the invisible visible. Legibility. From the smallest sea formed by a breach, we see this object form in the shape of a heart hanging from a platform built during the mid-century modern desire to practice atom bombing ourselves to keep us safe from communism. The dock that it's hanging from was the only dock that remains in the Salton Sea from mid-century modern atom bomb testing. And now we turn north to Playa Hunadu, or the Owens Valley. Another playa, another exposed basin. This one, like the Colorado River, began its headwaters as snow melts. The Owens Dry Lake lies like a scar beneath the white Sierra peaks, an emptied basin at the foot of the mountains that once fed it. The snowpack above is the memory of a river that no longer reaches the valley floor. What should be a simmering inland sea is instead a vast salt pan laced with alkali dust. Silver and water extracted from this valley helped build Los Angeles as we know it today. And what you see here in the absence of water is its residue. So when Metabolic Studio works here, we make a photograph of the landscape out of the landscape itself. We use the materials of extraction, silver, salts, water, and they become the material of this image. Just as the accreted heart formed the Salton Sea brine and held what that system carried, these photos do the same. The landscape is not just depicted, the landscape is doing the work. What you're seeing here is the playa at night functioning as our darkroom. Large photographic sheets are laid directly into the mud. There is no lab, only the night sky, no controlled environment, no controlled chemistry. The chemistry of the place is what completes the image. The pools you see are not natural wetlands. They're made out of the dust mitigation system itself, engineered shallow flooding designed to keep toxic dust from becoming airborne. Water is being used to manage the consequences of water being taken. But even inside this controlled infrastructure, life emerges. Extremophile bacteria, sodium thiosulfate, gather in these flooded zones. Organisms adapted to survive extreme salinity and toxicity. They metabolize sulfur compounds, including sodium thiosulfate, the same compound used to fix photographic images. They metabolize and control the dust and produce a developing fluid at the same time. So the dust control system has agency in photographic process. They are not contaminating the image, they are producing it. Not taking from the land, but letting the land, even in its engineered state, act. This photograph being developed in the landscape is developed by it. Let's stay with this image for a moment. You're looking at an image of the dying cottonwoods of the Owens Valley, trees dying because the water beneath them is continually being sucked out, the groundwater. Water continues to leave this place even 115 years after the LA Aqueduct opened. It leaves out of the river, it leaves out of the groundwater, moving south toward my city of Los Angeles, that rarely sends it back. The paper is modeled with traces of the lake bed immersion, the silver pulled forward from the photo paper by the chemistry of the Owens Lake. Those stains are not defects, they are residues. The image carries two archives at once. The living archive of the cottonwoods failing in real time, and the chemical archive of a lake bed still reacting to a century of extraction. Light, silver, and time continue working here long after the water was supposed to be gone. This is what a system looks like when it's designed to take without return. This video, which should have sound, connects two places that anchor our practice. One is here at Owens Lake in Payahunadu, a silo at the edge of a dry lake, a place that once held water and where the water will always return. The other is in downtown Los Angeles along the LA River, another post-industrial structure embedded in a river that has been straightened, armored, and watched. These two buildings are the hub studio spaces of Metabolic Studios practice. They sit inside the Cyborg Watershed, and one upstream, one downstream. Both of these sites also sit on sacred indigenous land. They are not neutral places. They exist within much older territories of meaning, responsibility, and kinship. Our work begins with that recognition. We at Metabolic Studio are an art and research practice aimed at reparation, working inside systems that have already been damaged and asking whether structures built for extraction and control can be shifted even partially toward life. Often we transmit sound between these two sites through internet radio, through shared signal, and through atmosphere. So performance within this long narrative has been really useful. It asks what it means to care for a landscape that's constantly being watched, for example. There's a surveillance of the whole LA aqueduct and the Colorado River that goes on a daily basis. And performing within that is this 100 Mules Walking the LA Aqueduct, which was granted permission by the LA DWP for the centenary exhibition, centenary of the opening of the LA Aqueduct. What you're looking at here is 100 mules, 10 strings of 10 mules moving slowly through the Eastern Sierra. This is the aqueduct made visible again. The mules were the original workforce of the Western infrastructure. George Washington, in fact, brought them to the East Coast from the UK to build the Erie Canal. I'm sorry, the earlier canal. They hauled water in the West to silver mines in these same mountains. They carried tools, timber, and concrete to build the Los Angeles aqueduct itself, and the mule at the same time was building the Panama Canal. In 2013, for the 100th anniversary of the aqueduct's opening, we walked its length with them. Undo what harms, and something ancient begins to stir. So those mules get us to LA, and now we're going to move into the work in the Los Angeles River, bending the river. So bending the river is not a metaphor, it's an action performed inside this already engineered body. The Los Angeles River is often described as dead or channelized, but this project begins from a different premise. The river is actually alive, though hybridized, part watershed, part machine, part legal fiction. Here, ecology is not restoration to an imagined past. It's adaptive reuse of the infrastructure, a reorientation of flows within an existing system. The river was never an adversary. It was a metabolic partner. Floodplains were the organs of this river. Predators were regulators of the behavior, redistributing pressure through the system so that no single species, including humans, could overconsume its future. Repair is a re-entanglement. To unpave, to let water linger, is to invite agency back into the system. Distributed across roots, sediments, insects, animals, microbes, it is to allow behavior to matter again. The repair of the Los Angeles River watershed begins here with the return of water to a floodplain, because only when water is allowed to linger can life reorganize itself enough to be regulated again. We sought to listen, to make a pathway for its return. There you see the floodplain where the river will go. Bending the river doesn't oppose this contradiction or condition, it works inside it. The project treats infrastructure as a prosthetic that can be re-scripted. Pipes, culverts, and concrete chambers become sensory organs. The flood control system becomes a circulatory system capable of feedback, learning, and adaptation. Here we now go down, down from Metabolic Studio, 50 feet down, and we cut an opening into where the LA River is, where the pipes that we've laid underneath the concrete will allow the groundwater and then the river water to see daylight in the floodplain for the first time again. This is a cyborg watershed. The Los Angeles River was disciplined by a particular imagination, a masculine voice that could not tolerate a free river that exceeded its banks, its schedule, its categories, a river that insisted on seasonal memory, lateral movement, sedimentary conversation, a river that refused to behave. Floods were framed as errors, as multi-species erasure. Floodplains were scraped away, predators were eliminated, soils compacted, time flattened. The river was made legible to engineers and insurers and illegible to everything else. In our transformation, regulation did not disappear. Concrete in the earlier version of the river that we're amending became and replaced the apex predators, the mountain lions, the grizzly bears. Concrete, not because it kills, but because it decides. It decides where water may move, how fast it must go, what life can cling to the margins. It suppresses hesitation, eliminates refuge, accelerates consequence. And force, unlike relationship, is metabolically expensive. Concrete must be surveilled, repaired, reinforced, litigated. It requires endless energy inputs to maintain an illusion of permanence in a world defined by change. And as the climate shifts, the rigidity of this system becomes increasingly brittle. The geometry encodes decisions about speed, hierarchy, and control. Straight lines privilege velocity, angles, discipline, flow. Smooth surfaces erase memory. What we call efficiency is often the removal of pause, of friction, of relation. To bend geometry is to reintroduce time into space. So in this picture, the middle console involves 108 federal, state, and local permits. And to the right, the first private water right in the city of Los Angeles, all awarded to this artwork to do something novel, which is to make the first amendment to the LA River since it was built in 1938. This is what I'm currently working on called the Mother Well. So the cleansed river before it's released to meander through the city will be held underground in a cistern that you'll be able to be inside of. It's called the Mother Well because water is life, and those broken narratives that we live by need to be reconnected. And I think having a bodily experience where you're actually able to walk through that cleansed water will be really lovely. We're currently in the permitting phase of this. In the meantime, we are taking jackhammers and unpaving floodplains, releasing the underland from below the tarmac. Below the spectacle of these channelized rivers and roads exists another river, an underland of seepage, of low flow, of microbial labor and sedimentary exchange. This is where repair actually happens. Bending the river operates here in the slow, lateral, infrastructural subconscious of the watershed. And this is what the watershed of contemporary Los Angeles looks like, where every red is a gutter running on a street, on asphalt, running to those blue lines, which are the managed LA River and the Arroyo Seco. And what we're currently doing is every full moon, we get out our jackhammers and we take out a parking spot in somebody's space that wants to release the pressure of that watershed. So over the last 4 months, we've freed 4 parking spots in Los Angeles with a performative action called Meandros. It takes an hour and some heavy equipment. And I'll show you how it's done in case you want to do it here. There should be sound here of jackhammers. Imagine the saws and the sound. So this is 3 hours of work by our Equipo de Milagros, our miracle team. And then a bunch of people who volunteer to lift the tarmac out. It took us 35 minutes to release this one parking spot. And this is important because a lot of people are often intimidated by the scale of Metabolic Studios projects. So we thought it's important to do something that we can all do at the scale of a watershed, one parking spot at a time. So let's skip scales again and go back to the Intermountain West, where we began with the Columbia, Colorado, and Rio Grande rivers, as well as the Great Basin. And let's talk about taking back control. of what matters, which is water. Can we really rely on the US federal government to take care of the watershed? It is currently the US Bureau of Engineers that takes care of all water bodies in the United States. So this is a conceptual artwork of mine to form a new country. The country is called Rose. You can apply for a passport to Rose. Before we had cities, before we had concrete, before the straight lines beloved by empire, we had rivers, rivers that wandered, rivers that carved valleys, rivers that stitched entire ecosystems into being through kinship. What we have today is a geography of control, an architecture of power rather than flow, an architecture of extraction rather than kinship. This is the moment when human hands need to seize and give back the river's agency. What has been straightened and armored needs to be released to meander. Rivers have never forgot how to move. They braid, they wander, they cut new channels, and they refuse confinement. What we're seeing here with this passport and their application are props and not policy documents. They are deliberately unfinished civic forms that I put into your collective hands. These documents are intentionally uncomfortable, like all civic documents. They sit between friction and governance, where new frameworks are still fragile enough to imagine. Before laws change, language changes it, and we will be the people changing that. Before infrastructure changes, we rehearse different forms of belonging. So I want to say plainly, artists must and need to create on the same scale that society has the capacity to destroy. We braid disciplines. We flow toward the places most starved of attention. We carve new pathways through systems built to resist change. And yes, the carving includes the unglamorous labor, the paperwork, the permits, the agency meetings, the endless forms. This too is hydrology. When extraction operates at the scale of the whole continent, artists must respond at the scale of the watershed. We must behave like rivers, uncontainable, necessary, and in motion. Artists need to create on the same scale that society has the capacity to destroy. If concrete is the apex predator of simplified systems, then creation has to meet destruction at the same scale. With practices capable of operating inside systems across time, law, land, and life, we have capacity to repair, the capacity to stay, the capacity to work at the scale of a watershed. Protect the source, tend the system, and let life reorganize itself. Thank you. We can turn up the lights and have a discussion now. Went through a lot. It's on the metabolicstudio.org website. We currently have about 2,000 citizens spread across the Intermountain West and a smattering in Europe. And you get a passport. I would not try and use it at the airport. But the basis of it is that once you join, You form your own cohort where you're living and you create the rules that protect the watershed where you are. And we are hosting gatherings every Friday the 13th at Metabolic Studio, and they're happening right now in the Rose Conglomerate in and around Eastern Oregon, as well as in El Paso around the Rio Grande. So we use Friday the 13th, a notoriously bad luck day, to think about the upside of the downside, which is forming the next chapter. Yes.
Followed your work since I thought your heart replica, whale heart replica, Desert X in 2023. And it seems to me that a lot of your practice really involves, and I don't think it was evident here, it really involves community, and in a way that almost feels like partnerships. You know, there's mutual benefit, there's an intentional activity that you're usually doing. And I know that some of your work has been in museums in the LA area. And my question is, how do you see, what do you see as the role of museums in your practice as an environmental artist?
So are you asking what I see as the role of museums, or how the community that participates in Metabolic Studio is a kind of de facto audience for work as well?
I'm thinking of established museums like the Hammer Museum or places like that. Like how do they participate in this community, and what do you see as their role in your practice?
Very little. I mean, the problem with the museum exhibition is the amount of time that museum exhibitions usually last. Like a long show will be 3 months usually, and transformative metabolic works never end. So the question is, what can a museum do that can partner with artwork that places utility at the center of the 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 practice, right? So I think that museums are really critical in uplifting that this is art at all, right? Because I think a lot of people turn to museums to understand what's happening. So I've been, fortunate to have museums take pieces of things and give us the opportunity to show and be contextualized in that way. But it also can create a distortion because people will think, well, that project ended. What are you doing now? Right? So the question is, like, if you're interested in the laws of thermodynamics and their consequences, you'll realize that everything is about finding equilibrium. In a system way out of balance, what we're doing at Metabolic Studio is performative actions aimed at readdressing this metabolic imbalance and using the performative action to constantly have people collaborate and extend that narrative and shape that narrative into their own form. So the issue with, like, for example, a piece like Meandros, which is what I got the Guggenheim to realize, right, is that each work is about creating a space for a mini novel urban ecosystem to emerge by others, including birds, bees, pollinators, and all the rest. So what we do is remove a parking space, clean the ground, and add landslide soil that would normally go to a dump, and then add roof water, and let the rest happen. But what's forming is a network of care amongst these different people who unpave. And some people are having, clay making things and making goddesses around theirs, and other people want to grow food. So the idea of an addition for a project like this is about creating a growing network of artworks that can be appropriated by many and will go on and live. So, what I think of, one of the things that collecting museums are doing in Los Angeles is often collecting archives, which I think is really important. One of the most important things about Los Angeles is the Getty's archive of the Research Institute's archive and their collection specifically of feminist art in Los Angeles. It's one of the most important, I think, contributions of Los Angeles has been the feminist art movement and educational practices. And Metabolic Studio happens to sit next door to the Historic Women's Building. So I think that that collection has really helped me and younger generations to understand the gender issues around the LA River, right? And the idea of the control of the wild river and the kind of etymological roots of the word patriotism and patriarchy, and how these things really seep into the idea of control. So I think that museums have a really critical role to play in the collection of archives, and that art spaces like the ICA that are not collecting institutions have a really big role to play in creating understanding that new modalities of creation dedicated to the web of life are happening, because otherwise I'm not sure it would be easily understood as artwork. Does that answer your question?
So with this nature of work, I can imagine that there's a lot of hurdles and hoops that you navigate. And I'm curious about what kind of tools or resources that you find yourself returning to kind of like maintain your resilience.
Great question. So for me, the most important thing in maintaining my resilience has been making art. So I have a studio practice where I make paintings and sculptures, and that really fuels me and reminds me about, what it means to be happily alive. The other thing that really fuels me is community and having a space that's alive and vital and people come to really fuels me. What's really hard about the hurdles of the paperwork and all of that is that each of them is just one narrative and none of them know about all the rest, right? So when you get 108 federal, state, and local permits, it's not like making a movie when you see that big line of credits and then everybody says, and that's why this movie is winning the Academy Award, right? It's like they only know their permit. So there is no aha moment. And it's extraordinarily exhausting to have spent more than a decade getting all of those permits, office by office, conversation by conversation. And then somebody leaves and that whole story goes with them. It's something I've really had to struggle with, is that kind of invisibility on that front and how depleting that kind of labor is. So I have had to make sure to make time for being vigilant to remind myself why I make art, which is to have a practice that is immediately gratifying. But they're very right now, they're kind of far apart. And actually, looking at Gabriella right now, I just want to give a shout out to the show that's currently on at MoCA Tucson, because there's a wonderful show about, about the toxicity in the watershed in southern Tucson and the years of labor that went into uncovering that narrative is portrayed in the museum in a kind of collage where you've got diagrams and Xeroxes of what's going on mixed with watercolor paintings. And like, it's all part of what I believe is going to be a kind of next wave of production, because I do believe we're going to have to take the future into our own hands as creatives. So I think that what I have lived through is something we're all going to have to live through. I think that the optional activist artist moment is over. Like, I think we're all going to have to be doing that and figuring out how to show people how and show what we make at the same time. And that's, I hope the art world catches up. But in the meantime, I think it's up to us to insist on not self-marginalizing, saying, you know, this is my work, both and, so that people understand, you know, the training we have in seeing magic, or the consideration we have in thinking about art as spell casting, and the performances that I make with 100 Mules, where I get to spend 100, you know, I get to look into the eyes of 100 mules for 1 month from full moon to full moon. Like, that is a deeply meaningful and mysterious gesture that needs to be part of the narrative, which is kind of why I tried this big challenge lecture today, which is, let's see if I can actually cover the scope of what we're doing. And of course, there's many things I didn't get enough time to really think about, like, how do I portray the fact that we had Tibetan monks at the studio 2 weeks ago doing a sand mandala uh, with hundreds of street vendors who were coming to the studio for a sanctuary space, watching this with their children running around, right? Um, Not in a room full of our soil beds with mushrooms growing up. Like, how do I show everything with all of this? So you'll have to come to Metabolic Studio to capture the magic, like little butterflies.
I have a question about the Salton Sea.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
My original research on it, fed by the Colorado River, that actually broke out and flooded the sink to make the sea. Am I correct, or is there something I'm missing here? And
Yeah, there was a diversion from the canal from the Colorado that went to the Imperial Valley, and that split, and then it filled the Salton Sink. Correct.
So I
Do you have any? Okay. Do you have any tips for any artists starting out on how to take the first steps from their vision to going through the planning process and all the hoops that has something, an idea?
Well, I think, again, the idea of thinking like a river, which is to think about building your braid, right? You're not going to be able to do it by yourself. So I think to start by hosting a potluck and inviting people to discuss things like what your project is super helpful. So I have friends who are policy geeks who were very instrumental, who are dedicating their career to the intersection of art and policy. And they've been involved with the work that we're doing for a decade. We're currently working on not only the permitting for the mother well, which I showed you, but permitting to get landslide debris and the wood from the burnt forests around Altadena to be allowed to be used to rebuild Altadena, because right now those things are considered debris and not building materials. But we've actually found neighbors who mill lumber who have been able to stockpile enough wood to make all of the building components for at least 1,000 new houses in Altadena. And the only thing preventing that from happening right now is there's no permits that allow those logs to be seen as building material. So my friend, who is a policy geek, has called friends who are calling friends. And all of a sudden, there's a meeting next week to make that happen. So that would be an example of a bunch of us getting together and saying, how do we stabilize Altadena, which is the part of LA that the Eaton fire burned, right? It's important because that part of LA was historically Black, and it was historically Black because of redlining after the Second World War. And so there's families that have been there for a really long time with rich stories and rich narratives, and we want to help keep them there. And property developers are coming in. So that would be an example of how the art and activist community is coming together, where I've found a trucking company with a young woman in charge who's willing to bring landslide debris from the rains instead of to the dump, to lay down yards in school yard areas, even though technically it's not legal, as long as I don't put it on social media or make a film about it. Right? Because she doesn't want to lose her contracts. So I would say the best way to make things happen is to go, strictly speaking, post-legitimate. The legitimate way to go is too slow. Like, if I knew what I know now, there is no way that I would have spent a decade getting 100 some odd permits to do plumbing under the LA River, right? Because there's it. But if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have realized that there was a river underneath the river with clean soil, that concrete kept from getting polluted. Right? So there was things I had to learn. But when I think about how to do things more efficiently, simply going out with a jackhammer and replenishing the aquifer one parking spot at a time with no permits makes a hell of a lot more sense, and is much more sustainable and kind of much more fun, because it's like a barn raising in reverse. Gabriela. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Yeah, Gordon Montauk Clark was one of my heroes. One of the things that he did, which was so great, do you remember the fake estates? This would be a really good example of like the absurdity. He bought a property on auction for like, I don't know, $10 or something ridiculous that you could do nothing on. It was permitted for nothing. So he couldn't do anything with it, but he turned it around and showed it in an art gallery and got a lot of money for selling the property deeds, right? And that allowed him to make interventions in the material world. So again, the strategy of how to make these things work involves quite a lot of playful imagination, a bit of a Wile E. Coyote kind of mentality, being quick and light on your feet. But I will say one of the interesting things that we as artists have in our back pocket is that nobody understands why we're doing anything. And that works in my favor, right? So when I went into, for example, speak to the Army Corps of Engineers in Los Angeles, they just could not figure out why somebody would possibly want to spend their time getting all these permits together in order to put some pipes under the river and then cover them up again. So it's like, I was like, that's a very good question. You're just going to have to trust me on this. And they were like, okay, like, I mean, if you want to get water to a floodplain and you're willing to put all this work into something no one's ever going to see, right? Then we're going to take a risk on this because they know it has to happen, right? They know they can't just continually send water out to sea. But they kind of liked the idea that this was not understandable as a development, a I wasn't going to make LA River beer and make a profit, although I am thinking about that. So it was just, simply speaking, not understandable. And that kind of, I think, gave us the edge in getting that permit. Now the work is getting more complicated because we've got all of our work has been performative up to this moment, and now we have infrastructure. So the question is, whose hands will that go to, and what will the decision making be? So we're trying to work with smart folks that are not on our team to figure out whether we can make a cyborg watershed, which is part AI, right? And give the water right back to the river itself. Let the river manage itself, right? Based on sensors and all kinds of other controls. Because it's going on around the world, rights of nature. Not going on too much in the US yet. But as an artwork, if we could give this private water right back to the river, that would be great. So that's kind of the next phase besides the mother well. Back row, yeah. About what? I can also repeat your question. Okay. Um, I'm interested in the idea of a recalibration of life on Earth as a goal of this work. So the idea of extraction and like capital growth at all costs is clearly not working. So I'm interested in Bending the River being a case study for a new kind of understanding of rebalance. So for an example of that, when we went into construction in 2019, the construction was permitting us to cut 300 feet of concrete, about 8 feet wide, 300 feet long, out of the LA River, and insert vitrified clay pipes into the river and then cover it with concrete again. So we could redirect a small part of the flow to a well where it could be lifted, cleansed, and redistributed. But when we lifted the concrete, we discovered that there was a river underneath the river that nobody ever knew about, because all we knew was about the river on top of the river. So when we lifted that first piece of concrete up and saw a river underneath the river, we tested the water and it was clean and it was beautiful and it was turquoise. And I looked and I saw all this soil underneath it and rock and bird feathers and tree parts. And I realized that when they poured the concrete on top of the river, they just graded it and poured concrete on top of the primary basin around the mountains of Los Angeles. So I thought, well, I'm just going to take all of that soil that we're going to remove and bring it to our parking lot. I unpaved the parking lot, stuck that soil on top of it. It's about a half acre. And within 3 months, a forest reemerged. So for the same cost of putting pipes under the river and completing that job, we also got a half acre of a primary forest that reemerged. So that's what I mean. The abundance that's inherent in the web of life is beyond our comprehension right now, right? So every action like this is an opportunity to relearn the real value of any specific move you make. And so I try and tell my architecture friends and students, do not practice architecture the way you were taught it. Save every piece of soil that you unearth. Do not return the water from the ground table into the gray water system. It can be cleansed using mushrooms, right? We need to rethink waste. We call way too many things waste. Imagine that the entire history of the Intermountain West is one of floods and landslides. And we build our highways where those floods and landslides happen. And so our taxpayer dollars are going to pay for trucking that landslide debris to a dump. When in fact, if you truck that landslide debris to where there's been a burnt down fire, you will sequester the toxicity of the fire in the ground and those things will germinate again. So those are my goals inherent in this, and saying that in art as reparation, there's a new accounting that wants to happen where the real value of any move is way more than you think it is, because nature will heal itself. And when you think about the etymology of the word ecology, it really means good housekeeping. Ecos is from Greek home, and logos is logic. So ecology should just be good housekeeping. Don't throw away valuable things. Use them more intelligently, and think about a new way of accounting for that so that it becomes common sense for policymakers. I'm better off script than.
Getting all the concrete slabs taken out. And how far you get is you pay for it now that you'll find your own funding. How you finance?
It's a combination. It's a combination of funding, all of the above. There's public-private partnership going on here. Yeah. A lot of educational involvement as well. A lot of schools. So different networks of funding, brownfield grants, things like that. Brian.
Curious to the status of the mother well and the orb, and if there's a list to get in line for experiencing it when it's built.
You're number one, okay? You'll be the first one. We're just about to submit permits for that project. I learned that the best place to keep stored water is underground, right? In terms of, all the kind of risk vectors that engineers have to think about. And so when I thought about the mysteries that are inherent in the project and the kind of mysteries of embodiment that I think are important for giving people an understanding of, life as we know it, I realized that if I could make this cleansed water cistern a place that you could be in, that it might be like a kind of version of a water temple, but also a functional one. So that's the direction that I went. I also really liked the idea of it being more habitat on the top of it, right? So, not having something that's above the ground means there's more land for wetland. So I would say that that will probably be 3 to 5 years away from experience. So the well itself is a stilling well. And so what a stilling well is, for those of you who don't know, it means that the level of water in the LA River and the level of water in the well at Metabolic Studio are always the same. So between the current ground at Metabolic Studio and where the water comes in is 48 feet. And when it's pouring, and the river gets full up, it would go up 15 feet. So we have a 48 8-foot shaft where 15 from the bottom of it to 15 feet we can't build. But from 15 feet to 48 feet that's the size of the orb. But you'll be able, when you're in that orb, to actually enter into the well and sing to the river. That was the other thing I really wanted to do, is to make sure to treat the river we're not picking up to sound. So from that space underground, you'll be able to go read poetry or talk to the river and be in a very intimate space of about 8 feet around, like being in a submarine, or hopefully being like in your mother's belly. You know, that's the goal, is to have an amniotic experience with a wastewater river that's being returned to wellness by treatment and by the care and the connection that we have for water and it for us. Okay. Thank you, everybody.